Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Melissa. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. If you are new here, I talk about missing children on my YouTube channel. So go ahead and subscribe and hit that bell so you be notified when I upload a new video. Today is my birthday, so I just wanted to come in here and say thank you to anybody who has subscribed to my channel, and hopefully my channel will keep growing. I like putting these videos out there because something that just it breaks my heart, knowing that these families have to go to sleep every single day not knowing what their children are at. And I can never imagine or even picture the pain that this family have to go through every single day, just trying to find answer, wondering where their own children's at. And some family do have other children, and they have to find a way to stay strong to raise their other children. One thing that I've always seen is when there is children involved, and that one child goes missing, your parents become more strict with you. Like if you have siblings and one of your siblings go missing, and the parent becomes strict. You couldn't do the things that you were able to do no more because they don't want to have to go through that. And I kind of completely understand that, and it breaks my heart. And when I read these stories to y'all, and even when I read it before, when I'm researching, it just breaks me. It completely breaks me. So I do hope to keep growing my channel, keep speaking about these stories, and keep being their voices that we need to be for these little angels. And you never know, someone who comes up on my video could probably know something. So today we're going to be talking about the Sodder family children. So let's go ahead and get started. So on Christmas Eve, December 24th of 1985, a fire destroyed the Sodder residence in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Yeah, I don't know. I said it wrong, I know. United States. At the time, it was a copy by George Sodder, his wife Jennie, and 9 of their 10 children during the fire. George, Jennie, and 4 of the 9 children escaped. The bodies of the other 5 children have never been found. The surviving Sodder family believe for the rest of their lives that the 5 missing children survived. The Sodders never rebuilt the house, instead converting the site into a memorial garden to the lost children. In the 1950s, as they came to doubt that their children had perished, the family put up a billboard at the site along State Route 16 with pictures of the 5, offering a reward for information that would bring closure to the case. It remained standing until shortly after Jennie Sodder's death in 1989. In support of their beliefs that the children survived, the Sodder had pointed to a number of unusual consequences before and during the fire. George disputed the West Virginia Fire Department, finding that the blaze was electrocuting an organ. Nothing had recently had the house rewired and inspected. George and his wife suspect arson, leading to the theory that the children had been taken by the Sicilian Mafia. Phrase in retaliation for George's outspoken criticism of the fascist government of his negative in Italy. So basically, he's from Italy, and he was being really disrespectful to the government over there, and he had his opinion, which is normal. I think we all have opinions of our president and stuff. I don't think I've ever heard somebody losing their lives because of it. I may be wrong, but in that time, George was just so outspoken, and what he said about the government in Italy wasn't something that other people that were from Italy or lived around really did not like. State and the federal efforts to investigate the case further in the early 1950s yielded no new information. The family did, however, later receive but may have been a picture of one of these boys as an adult during the 1960s. The last surviving daughter, along with their grandchildren, continued to publicize the case in the 21st century in the media online. So let's go to the background. George Sodder was born with the name Giorgio Sudu in Toulon, Sardine, Italy in 1895. He immigrated to the United States 13 years later with an older brother who went back home as soon as both boys had cleared custom at Ellis Island. For the rest of his life, George, as he became to be known, would not talk much about why he had left his homeland. Sodder eventually found work in the railroads in Pennsylvania, carrying water and the other supplies to workers. After a few years, he took more permanent work as a driver in Smithers, West Virginia. He then started his own trucking company, intentionally hauling filled dirt to construction sites, and later hauling coal mine in the region. Jennie Caprina, a storekeeper daughter in Smithers, who had also immigrated from Italy in her childhood, became George's wife. The Sodder family settled outside nearly Vettiville, which had a large population of Italian immigrants, in the two-story timber farmhouse 2 miles north of town. And in 1923, they had their first of their 10 children. George's business prospered, and they became one of the most respected middle-class families around. And in the words of one local official, however, George had a strong opinion about many subjects and was not shy about expressing them. Sometimes alerting people, in particular his resident opposition to Italy dictator Benito Mussolini. He led to some strong arguments with other members of the immigrant community. The last of the Sodder children, Sylvia, was born in 1942. By then, their second oldest son, Joe, 21, had left from home to serve in the military during World War II. The following year, Mussolini was deposed and executed. However, George's criticism of the late dictator had left some hard feelings in October of 1945. A visiting life insurance salesman, after being referred, warned George that his house would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. Attribute to this all to the dirt remarks you have been making about Mussolini. Another visitor to the house assembly seeking work took the occasion to go around the back and warn George that the pair of few boxes would cause fire someday. George was puzzled by the obsession since he had just had the house rewired when an electric stove was installed, and the local electric company has said afterwards it was safe. In the weeks before Christmas that year, George's older son had also noticed a strange car parked along the main highway through town. It accompanied watching the younger Sodder children as they returned from school. The Sodder family celebrated on Christmas Eve in 1945. Marino, 19, the oldest daughter, had been working at a dime store in downtown Vettiville, and she surprised 3 of her younger sisters, Martha, 12, Jennie, 8, and Betty, 5, with new toys she had brought for them as gifts. The younger children were so excited they asked their mother if they could stay up past what would have been their usual bedtime. At 10 p.m., Jennie told them they could stay up a little later as long as the 2 older boys, who were still awake, 14-old Mauricio and his 19-year-old brother Luis, remembered to put the cows and feed the chickens before going to bed themselves. George and the 2 older boys, John, 22, and George Jr., 16, who had spent the day working with their father, were already asleep. After remaining the children of those remaining chores, she took Sylvia upstairs with her, and they went to bed together. The telephone rang at 12:30 a.m. Jennie woke up and went downstairs to answer. The caller was a woman whose voice she did not recognize, asking for a name she was not familiar with. The second of laughter and clicking glass in the background, Jennie told the caller she had reached a wrong number, later recalling the woman's weird laugh. She hung up and returned to bed. As she did, she noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains were not drawn, 2 things the children normally attended to do when they stay up later than their parents. Marino had fallen asleep on the living room couch, so Jennie assumed the other children who had stayed up late had gone back up to the attic where they slept. She closed the curtains, turned out the lights, and returned to bed. At 1 a.m., Jennie was again awoken by the sound of an object hitting the house roof with a loud bang, then a rolling noise. After hearing nothing further, she went back to sleep. After another half an hour, she woke up again, smelling smoke. When she got up again, she found the room George used for his office was on fire around the telephone line and the fuse box. Jennie woke him, and he in turn woke his older sons. Both parents and four of their children, Marino, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., escaped the house. They frantically yelled to the children upstairs, but heard no response. They could not go up there as the stairway itself was already aflame. John said in his first police interview after the fire that he went up to the attic to alert his siblings sleeping there, though he later changed his story to say he only called up there and did not actually see them. Efforts to find aid and rescues the children were unexpectedly complicated. The phone did not work, so Marino ran to the neighbor's house to call the Fettiville Fire Department. A driver on a nearby road had also seen flames and called from a nearby tavern. They too was unsuccessful, either because they could not reach the operator or because the phone they turned out to be broken. Either the neighbor or the passing motorists were eventually successful in reaching the fire department from another phone in the center of town. George, barefoot, attempted to climb the house outside wall and broke open window, cutting his arm on the process. He and his son intend to use a ladder to the attic to rescue the other children, but it was not in the usual spot, resting against the house and could not be found nearly. A water barrel that could have been used to extinguish the fire was frozen solid. George then tried to pull both of the trucks he used and his business up to the house and used them to climb the attic window, but neither of them would start, despite having worked perfectly during the previous day. If this is not suspicious, giving suspicious vibes, I don't know what is. Frustrated, the six Sodder who had escaped had no choice but to watch the house burn down and collapse over the next 45 minutes. They assumed that the other 5 children had perished in the blaze. The fire department, low in manpower due to the war, relying on individual firefighters to call each other, did not respond until later that morning. She, F. J. Maurice, said the next day that the already slow response was further hampered by the inability to drive fire truck, requiring that he was until someone who could drive was available. The firefighters, one of whom was a brother of Jennie's, could do little but look through the ashes that were left in the Sodder basement. By 10 a.m., Maurice told the Sodder that they had not found any bones, as it may have been expected, and the other children had been in the house as it burned. According to another account, they did find a few bone fragments and internal organs, but chose not to tell the family. It also been noted by modern fire professionals that their research was cursory at best. Nevertheless, Maurice believed that the 5 children and accounted for had died in the fire, suggesting it had been hot enough to burn their bodies completely. Maurice told George to leave the site undisturbed so that the state fire marshal's office could conduct a more thorough investigation. However, after 4 days, George and his wife could not bear the site anymore, so he bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site with the intention of converting into memorial garden for the lost children. The local coroner convened an inquest the next day, which held that the fire was an accident caused by faulty warning. Among the jurors was the man who had threatened George that his house would be burned down and his children destroyed, in tribulation of his anti-Muslim remarks. Death certificates for the 5 children were issued December 30th. The local newspaper conducted itself stating that all of the bodies had been found, but then later in the same story reporting that only part of one body was recovered. George and Jennie were too grief-stricken to attend the funeral on January 2nd of 1946, although their surviving children did. Not long after, as they began to rebuild their lives, the Sodder family started to question all the official findings about the fire. They wondered why, if they had been caused by an electric problem, the family Christmas lights had remained on throughout the fire earlier stage when the power should had gone out. Then they found the ladder that had been missing from the side of the house on the night of the fire at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away. Which that's one thing that I always, when I hear the story and when I read the story, if it was caused by an electric wire, why was the Christmas tree still up? I mean, the lights were still on. Because when an electric fire happens, I mean, when something happens to the wire that is connected to your light, and you have a Christmas tree, your Christmas tree is gonna burn too. It's not just gonna not burn until like later. It's gonna burn the same time, and it's gonna do these weird noises. A telephone repairman told the Sodder that the house phone line had not been burned through in the fire, as they had intentionally thought, but cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole and reach 2 feet away from it to do so. A man who neighbors had seen stealing a block in Tinkle from the property around the time of the fire was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claimed he had been the one who cut the phone line, thinking it was a power line, but denied having anything to do with the fire. However, no record identifying the suspects exists, and why he would have wanted to cut any utility lines to the Sodder's house while stealing the block tackle has never been explained. Jennie said in 1968 that if he had cut the power line, she and her husband, along with their other 4 children, would never have been able to make it out of the house. That's smart. Jennie also had trouble accepting Maurice's belief that all trace of their children's body had been burned completely in the fire. Many of the household appliances had been found still recognizable in the ashes, along with fragments of the tiny roof. She contrasted the result of the fire with newspaper account in a similar house fire that she read around the same time that killed a family of 7. Skeleton remains of all the victims were reported to have been found in that case. Jennie burnt small piles of animals' bones to see if they would be completely consumed. No, none ever were. An employee of local cremation she conducted told her that human bones remain even after bodies are burned at a 200 Fahrenheit for 2 hours, far longer and hotter than the house fire could have been. The Sodder's truck failure to start was also considered. George believed that they had been tampered with, phrased by the same man who stole the block in Tinkle and cut the phone line. However, one of George's son-in-law told the Charleston Gazette Mail in 2013 that he had come to believe that the Sodder and his son may have, in their haste to start the trucks, fooled the engines. Some accounts have been suggested the wrong number phone call to the Sodder house night had also somehow been connected to the fire. However, investigators later located the woman who had made the call. She confirmed it had been a wrong number in her part. Well, what about the laugh? That's what I would want to know. A spring approached the Sodder as they had said that they would plant flowers in the soil bulldozer over the house. Jennie tended it carefully for the rest of her life. However, further developments in early 1946 rainforest, the families believed that their children they were memorialized may in fact be alive somewhere. Evidence soon emerged indicating that the fire had not started in the electricity fault and was instead set deliberately to the driver of the bus that passed through late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. A few months later, when the snow had melted, Sylvia found a small hard dark green rubber ball-like object in the rush nearly. George, recalling his wife's account of a loud thump on the roof before the fire, said it looked like pineapple bomb, hand grenade, or some other incendiary device. It used it in combined. The family later claimed that, contrary to the fire marshal's conclusion, the fire had started on the roof, although by then there were no way to prove it. Other witnesses claimed to have seen the missing Sodder children themselves. One woman who had been watching the fire from the road said she had seen some of them peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Another woman at a rest stop between Feltilly and Charleston said she had served the breakfast the next morning and noted the presence of a car with Florida license plates in the rest stop parking lot as well. The Sodder hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley from the nearby town of Guala, British, to look into the case. Tinsley informed the family that the insurance salesman who had threatened George over his anti-Muslim statement had been on the coroner jury that ruled the fire an accident. He also learned of rumors around Fayetteville that despite his report to the Sodder that no remains had been found in the ashes, Maurice had found a heart which he later packed into a metal box and secretly buried it. Maurice had apparently confessed this to a local minister who confirmed to George, and George Tinsley went to Maurice and confronted him with the news. Maurice agreed to show the two where he had buried the metal box, and they dug it up. They took what they found inside the box of a local funeral director who, after examining it, told them it was in reality fresh beef liver. They had never been exposed to fire. Later, more rumors circulated around Fayetteville. The Maurice had afterwards admitted the box with the liver had intended not to come from the fire originally. He had supposedly placed it where in the hope that the Sodder would find it and be satisfied that their missing children had intended to die in the fire. In one occasion, George saw a magazine photo of a group of young belle dancers in New York City, one of whom looked like his missing daughter, Betty. He drove all the way to the girls' school where he repeated demand to see the girl himself were refused. George also tried to investigate the FBI, investigating what he considered a kidnap. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally responded to his letters. Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be local character and does not come with the investigating journalization of this burial. If local authorities request the burial assistance, he added he would of course direct agents to assist, but the Fayetteville Police and Fire Department declined to do so. I don't even think I'm saying this word right. I'm going to put it out there. In August of 1949, George was able to produce Oscar Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, to supervise a new search through the dirt of the house site. After a very thorough search, effortless, including direct dictionary that belonged to the children, and some coins were found. Several small bones fragments were unearthed, determined to have been human vertebrae. The bone fragments were sent to Marshall T. Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian Institution, that they were confirmed to be lumbar vertebrae, all from the same person. Since the transverse receipts are fused, the age of his individual at the death should have been 16 or 17 years. Newman's report said the top limit of age should be about 22, since the central, which normally fuse at 23, are still infused. Thus giving the age range, it may not very likely that these bones were from any of 5 missing children, since the oldest, Maurice, had been 14 at the time, although the reporter allowed that the vertebrae of boy his age sometimes were advanced enough to appear to be at the lower end of the range. Newman added that the bones showed no signs of exposure to flame. Further, he agreed that it was very strange that those bones were the only ones found, since a wood fire of such short duration should have left full skeletons of all the children behind. The report concluded that the vertebrae had instead most likely come from the dirt that George had used to bulldoze the site. Later, Tinsley suspiciously confirmed that the the bone fragment had come from a cemetery in nearly Mountain Hope, but could not explain why they had been taken from there or how they came to be at the fire site. The Smith Station returned the bone fragment to George in September of 1949. According to its records, their current location is unknown. The investigation and its findings attracted national attention, and the West Virginia legislature held 2 hearings on the case in 1950. Afterwards, however, Government Oakley Lee Patterson State Police Superintendent W.E. Basher told the Sodder the case was hopeless and closed it all the state level. The FBI decided it had jurisdiction as possible in state kidnapping, but dropped the case after 2 years of falling through leads. With the end of official efforts to resolve the case, the Sodder family did not give up hope. The flyers print up with the picture of the children, offering a $500 reward, soon double, for information that would have settled the case for even one of them. And in 1952, they put up a billboard at the side of the house and in another along USA Route 60 near Instead with the same information. It would in time become a landmark for traffic through Fayetteville on USA Route 19, today's State Route 16. The family's efforts soon brought another report sighting of the children after the fire. Ed Crushfield, a woman who ran a Charleston hotel, claimed to have seen the children apparently a week afterwards. "I don't remember the exact day," she said in a statement. "The children had come in around midnight with 2 men and 2 women, all of whom appeared to be of Italian extraction. When she attempted to speak with the children, one of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me." She recalled that they left the hotel early the next morning. Investigators today do not, however, consider her story credible, as she had only first seen photos of the children 2 years after the fire, 5 years before she came forward. George followed up the leads in person, traveling to the areas from where her tips had come. A woman from St. Louis, Missouri claimed Martha was being held in a convent there. A bar patron in Texas claimed to have overheard 2 other people making many statements about a fire that happened on Christmas Eve in West Virginia some years before. None of those proved significant. When George heard later that a relative of Jennie's in Florida had children that looked similar to his, the relative had to prove the children were his own before George was satisfied. And in 1967, George went to Houston area and investigated another tip. A woman there had written to the family saying that Luis had revealed his true identity to her one night after having too much to drink. She believed that he and Mercury were both living in Texas somewhere. However, George and his son-in-law, Grover Paxton, were unable to speak with her. Police there were able to help them find the 2 men she had indicated, but they denied being the missing sons. Parsons said years later that they doubt about the denial and living in George's mind for the rest of his life. Another letter that they received that year brought the Sodder what they believe was the most credible evidence that at least Luis was still alive. One day, Jennie found in the mail a letter addressed to her, postmarked Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a picture of a young man of around 30, with features strongly resembling Luis, who would have been in his 30s if he had survived. On the back was written, "Louis Sorber, I love Brother Frankly, little boys." The family hired another private detective to go to Central City and look into this massive, but he never reported back to the Sodder, and they were unable to locate him afterwards. The picture nonetheless gave them hope. They had hit to the billboard leaving Central City out of it, and another published information out of fear that Louis may come to harm, and put in endearment over the fireplace. George admitted that the Charleston Geese mail late than the next year, that the lake information had been like hitting a rock wall. We can't go any further. He nevertheless vowed to continue. Time is running out for us, he admitted in another interview around the same time. But we only want to know if they did die in the fire. We want to be convinced otherwise. We want to know what happened to them. George Sodder died in 1969. Jennie and her surviving children expect John, who never talked about that night of the fire, except to say that the family should accept what happened and move on with their lives. And that's one of their sons. Continue to seek answers to the questions about the missing children. Fade. After George's death, Jennie stayed in the family home, putting up the fencing around it and adding additional rooms. For the rest of her life, she wore black mourning and to attend the garden and the side of the farmhouse. After her death in 1989, the family finally took the weather-herd worn billboard down. The surviving Sodder children, joined by their own children, continued to publicize the case, investigating leads. They, along with older residents, have theorized that the selling mafia was trying to extort money from George, and the children may have been taken by someone who knew about the planned arson and said they would be safe if they left the house. They were possibly taken back to Italy. If the children had survived all those years and were aware that their parent sibling had survived too, the families believe they may had avoid contact in order to keep them from harm. Sylvia Sodder Paston, the youngest of the surviving Sodder siblings, died in 2021. She was in the house on the night of the fire, which she said was her earliest memory. I was the last one of the kids to leave home, she recalled to the Gathering Mail in 2013. She and her father often stayed up late talking about what may have happened. I experienced their grief for a long time. She believed that her siblings survived that night and assisted with the effort to find them and publicize the case. Her daughter said in 2006 she promised my grandparents she wouldn't let the story die, that she would do everything she could. And in the first 20th century, the family efforts have come to conclude online forums like wetsleuth.com. In addition to media coverage, the increase the letter has led someone who had examined the case to believe that the children did in fact die in 1945. George Bragg, a local author who wrote about the case in 2012, book West Virginia Unsolved Murders, believed that John was telling the truth in his original account when he said he tried to physically awaken his siblings before fleeing the house. He allows that the conclusion may still not be correct logically tells you that they probably did burn in the fire, but you can always go back. You can't always go back logically. Stacey Horn, who did a segment on the case for National Public Radio around the 60th anniversary in 2005, also believed that the children's death in the fire and its most policy solution. And a contemporaneous post on her blog with material she had cut from her story for Time. She noted that the fire had continued to slaughter all night after the house collapsed, and that 2 hours was not enough time for it to search the ash thoroughly. Even if it had been, the firefighters may have not known what it took for. However, she said that there's enough genius weirdness about this whole thing that if someday it is learned that your children did not die in the fire, I won't be shocked. And in 2022, the History Channel aired an episode of the series History Gardens Mystery that detailed the events in the case. And that is the case of the Sodder children. I believe they're still alive. It's just no way. There's no way. I don't know how. I know that with cremation, when you get your family cremated, you get like sand. It looks like sand to me. I don't know if it has a name to it, but that's what it looks to me. It's like sand. Also, I believe that if they were dead, you would have found something. There's just no way. You would have found something. You would have found a bone. I have seen cases of people who have been killed and burned, and you still find the bones. You find the bones. These kids were alive, and that that insurance salesman person, I think he knows more than what he's saying. Because why would you knock on a person's house and be like, yeah, your house is gonna burn down and you're gonna lose your kids? I think he knew something and he just didn't want to get in trouble for it. I don't think that the guy that was stealing the box, I don't think he had nothing to do with it. But then I'm like, why are you stealing the box for? What are you gonna do with it? I don't know. But I think these kids were still alive. I agree. I think they're alive. I think they were taken to Italy for somebody to punish George, the family, because George did not like their government, and he was, he had a spoken mind, and he told the truth. He told how you feel. I mean, you have the right to. Not a lot of people are going to agree with it, but you have the right to. And I think that the remaining kids they went back to Italy, and they hit their face so good because they didn't want the other family to get in trouble. They didn't want, so they kept them to themselves, and they probably had gotten some new names. They probably do know who they are, but like I said, they're trying to protect their family, and they're really, if that's the case, that is really, really sad. But sometimes you have to do what you have to do to protect the ones you love, and if that means not communicating with them, then that's what you got to do. And I understand why John didn't want to talk about it, and I understand why John was so frustrated that his parents kept going and didn't. He, in his mind, is like, just give it up, like, because it affected him. It affected him so much, and he just didn't want to have to deal with the pain anymore. And I just feel bad for the parents. Like, you get you have to get a death certificate for your kids, even though they're still alive. But you still have to get that certificate. And I don't blame them for not going to the funeral. I really don't, because I don't think I would have had the strength to go, even especially if I knew that my children were okay. You're not fixing to tell me that my children are not dead. I know my children are alive. And I think that's what they believed since until the day they die. And I really do hope that someday we find answers. And I just don't understand how there was not a lot of firemen. That whole excuse that they were at war, I don't buy that, but okay. But I will be back with the new case, guys. I hope y'all enjoyed today's case. If y'all have anything to add, let me know. Let me know what y'all think, because this case to me is like one of the weirdest, craziest cases I've ever done. Bye.